Take care of my best friend.
Hey, screw you!
Oh, got ourselves a mean drunk.
Okay, let's begin.
Sequels can be really divisive, something I found out when I reviewed Max Payne 3 favorably. I played Condemned 2 once back in 2008, and not since. Over the years, I've heard a few people say that Condemned 2 is rubbish. In my sort of hazy memory, I remember it being quite good. Some of the moments have stood out for many years. I remembered bits of the doll factory, I remembered the hotel, and I definitely remembered the bear. After playing through the first Condemned, I was psyched to play the sequel again, and confirmed for myself that this game is as good as it was in my remembrance. Then I completed it, and oh boy. I don't want to get right into the debate as to whether or not Condemned 2 is good or bad, but it is a lot different tonally. The first game, Criminal Origins, started with a subdued, eerie crime scene opening. Our protagonist, Special Agent Ethan Thomas, was kind of an everyman. Nondescript clothing, a regular haircut, even a bit of a paunch. But I liked his design for that reason. The developers weren't trying hard to make a bankable action star. You just walked in the shoes of some dude until it was revealed later that his medical files had some redacted bits. Ethan's colleague from the Special Crimes Unit, Rosa, hinted that his bone density and strength were off the charts, suggesting something more going on. Things got a little goofy with the Oro Dark Primary and Ethan ending up with his metal mouth in the bathroom, but overall the first game was relatively grounded. Look, if you don't want the story spoiled for Condemned 2, skip ahead to the gameplay section of the video. I have to talk about the story with details to be able to justify my rationale for why I feel the way I do about it. In the sequel, titled Bloodshot, things have changed. First and foremost, who is that? That's Rosa?
Oh no, he's hot!
She grew the hair out, got herself a Claire Redfield jacket, and has a sweet thigh gap going. Right off the bat, red flag. Oh, we gotta make her look sexy for the young male demographic. Guys, nobody gave a shit when the girl looked like Filbert.
Now get down there and start pushing some pulp.
Right, boss.
We all liked Rosa because she had our back. Anyway, at least she looks hot. Our boy Ethan, on the other hand, has the complexion of a gray gym sock that you pump your man milk into. It's been 11 months since the first game, and he's morphed into a barfly that crushes pills into his stiff beverage. This gruesome dude with bits of metal in his mouth, known as Inferi, blows a kiss at us. Now, Ethan's not into that gay stuff, so he just viciously assaults this guy. The subtitles describe this as the sound of violence. In the first 60 seconds of Bloodshot, we've established that this is officially the edgiest sequel in the history of Edge. Like with Rosa, the team was trying to give a distinct look to our new Ethan, and it sucks balls. The beard, the shaggy hair, a band-aid under his right eye, the edgy shirt with a bullseye on it, gee, that's subtle, and his fists, which are apparently taped until further notice. He also has a new voice.
Ethan Thomas. Drunk, tired, and pissed off. Why? Because this...
Okay, switch to grass and take a nap, you stupid idiot. That's not Ethan. I guess Monolith didn't feel like his appearance was quite edgy enough and had to replace Greg Grunberg with a dude that gargles with gravel. He kinda sounds like me a little bit. He's mad because the city doesn't see what's killing it, and when you find out what that actually is, it makes everything so much worse. We're getting there.
He found me. I don't have much time. Ethan trusted you.
So, Rosa gets a distressing call from Malcolm Van Horn begging her to find Agent Thomas. Agency Director Ike Farrell, who had a few lines in the first game, is now a more prominent character. He gets Rosa to wrangle up Ethan, who reluctantly agrees to set out to find Van Horn after nearly eating a brick. Farrell sends out a team composed of Ethan Thomas, a violent addict gifted a shiny new firearm. What could go wrong? John Dorland, a real no-nonsense operator, and Pierce LaRue, the fun-loving fella of the bunch. Rosa is on comms like in the first game. Turns out, our old buddy Malcolm was split wide open in a shady motel and had his sternum removed. It's also noted that he had strange vocal cords. This is tied back to the first game where Ethan's medical records, specifically that of his sternum and vocal cords, were redacted. It appears as though this oil, this evil, is infecting everyone and everything in Metro to a much greater degree in Bloodshot. Good thing it's not caused by sonic hockey pucks awaiting destruction by the Dragonborn. That would be silly. The oil is supposed to represent the overflow of hate and violence in the city. Okay, neat. I dig the metaphor, but A, it makes the game look pretty ugly in some parts, and B, sonic hockey pucks. Moving on. As LaRue and Dorland escape with Van Horn's body, Dorland deliberately causes Ethan to be left behind, landing him in the doll factory. The doll factory contains what appear to be sentient kamikaze dolls and a random lady with a lollipop saw bat. Yeah, you heard me. We'll get back to that. Ethan makes it out and apparently is now Batman as he obnoxiously jump scares Rosa, now bereft of peripheral vision it seems. She teases him with a connection between him and Van Horn. Ooh. Throughout the game, Ethan is haunted by hallucinations and other annoying visual filters that are meant to emphasize that he's going crazy, guys, look out. Mayor of Metro City, Rachel Mars, was found outside of a museum, decapitated and disfigured with X patterns, to which Rosa speculates that this is the work of Leland Van Horn, or SKX from the first game. Perhaps he survived the end of Condemned 1 and was nursed back to health by Malcolm Van Horn, his uncle? Right. Seems plausible.
I found something when investigating Van Horn's body.
Metal pieces?
No, something better. I found traces of fecal matter on his shoes.
Gee, that's not contrived. So, in accordance with deer poop, I guess we have to go to this lodge. We also get a good look at Ethan's inner demon, which, we'll find out, takes on many different forms, so to speak. The demon tells Ethan that Farrell is trying to protect him. Okay. The demon vanishes, leaving this pilot deceased, I guess. Did Ethan just pummel this guy to death in a daze? Why is every character in this game, aside from LaRue and Rosa, so unlikable? I will become one of them. Uncle saved me to rise again. The Oro awaits me. Oh, for fuck. Well, I guess the game just answered the SKX revival thing. Malcolm Van Horn brought Leland to this lodge to nurse him back to health. Leland thanked him by removing his sternum. Smart decision, Malcolm. I mean, I love my nephew too, but Jesus, dude. Rosa mentions that the pictures on the wall have pieces of metal on them, metal that Mayor Mars had ripped from her body as well. Ooh, conspiracy. But you don't have to wonder long. Condemned 2 doesn't have any trouble explaining everything to you. In the finale at the lodge, we find Malcolm Van Horn's library. On his computer is a video file that explains to Ethan that his parents used to be members of the Oro, the cult that was referenced at the end of the first Condemned. For their betrayal, the Oro tracked them down and terminated them. Malcolm Van Horn is the only one that knew of Ethan's origin. How? Why? Who cares, I guess. Apparently, the Oro figured out who Ethan was, likely due to his job with the Bureau. So, if he had just worked at a regular place, like if he was a really good auto mechanic out of Spartanburg, would anyone have ever known who he was, save for Malcolm Van Horn? He just happened to become a special agent where he received thorough medical examinations, and because the Oro have footholds in the government, someone saw the x-rays and went, hey guys, look. Okay. Van Horn then tells you that the Oro snuffed out his wife and child long ago, and thus Malcolm has opposed the organization for many years. But because his nephew, Leland, SKX, wanted to become a member of the Oro, this put the two of them at odds. At odds? Political and religious arguments on Thanksgiving put family members at odds. This group of boneheads took away the most precious things in this man's life, and his nephew was a big fan and still wanted to join after that. And this put you at odds? Then, years later, when he started playing the game of, becoming a serial killer, you still wanted to help this goof? And then he fed himself a .45 slug in the trunk of your car, and you decided to nurse him back to health in a lodge that has a rabid grizzly bear running around? You know something? Let me put this politely. These characters are dumb as fuck, and Malcolm Van Horn in particular deserved to be converted into human pizza in some rat nest hotel. You dumb old bastard. So, the SCU goons on the Oro's payroll bust in and Ethan battles them before being rescued by LaRue in what looks like the Snowcat from The Shining. We're then told by Rosa that SKX has been captured near the old bowling alley in Trenton, and that he might be our only hope to figure out what the heck is going on. There were some contrivances in Condemned 1, but Jesus. Speaking of SKX, guess who we get to talk to? Leland has been a busy boy after being set loose in Metro by Uncle Malcolm. I also like how Ethan reacts when he sees Leland's face.
Jesus!
Well, what did you expect? You were there when he fed himself a bullet, Ethan, like you're one to talk. So, Ethan asks why Leland ended his uncle, to which he replies that he wouldn't cooperate and that he had it coming. Okay. Then SKX taunts Ethan for the finger he removed in the first game and states that he thinks of Ethan whenever he looks in the mirror. Well, I guess that means Ethan shooting SKX is canon, because why else would he fixate on Ethan when looking at his face? Okay, SKX says that Malcolm Van Horn and the mayor held the secrets to the Oro. I need a drink. This plot is just so goofy, and I understand it. It's not confusing when you finish the game, it's just dumb. But we're working our way there. Hey, take a look at this big goofy thing on the wall. Thankfully, this isn't behind everything that's wrong in the city. That also would be silly. So, beep, boop, dominoes fall. I'm trying to speed it up here, but at the end of the school level, Ethan unleashes his special vocal power and explodes Farrell's head. No, really. He's apparently Dovahkiin. Then we end up at Svensson's Magic Theater, looking for a man named the Magic Man. Yes, really. Why? Because it's a contrived plot device that gets us from point to point. At the start, Ethan battles his demon that we saw earlier in the plane on the way to the lodge. Here, he represents Ethan's alcoholism. Oh yeah, Ethan can drink a fifth of booze to calm his delirium tremens in battle. Goody. You know, the whole thing about booze being a tormenting, taunting demon that requires strength to overcome is actually great. Or rather, it could be great. Here, you just beat the shit out of this thing like any old piss-covered bum, and suddenly, Ethan doesn't want to drink anymore, and his withdrawals apparently just cease after this. Yep, that's a nuanced understanding of how that works.
I'm not going to drink this. I'm not going to drink this!
Stumbling around, Rosa contacts us to relay more exposition, and this is where things really start to go off the rails. She explains that the Oro's plan involves something called sonic generation. That is, the emission of sounds from not only a person's mouth, but from their entire body. Victims of this sound projection hallucinate, and shortly thereafter become psychotic and violent. So, these little hockey puck things that you destroy throughout the game, yeah, apparently they've been planted by the Oro to cause people to go ballistic, especially mentally susceptible folks like addicts and the feeble-minded. And, skipping ahead a bit, it turns out that the Oro may have been using sonic generation to cause madness en masse. I wish I was kidding, but stay with me. Oro is short for Oro Invictus, Latin for invincible voice. This is a trait that the cult was founded over approximately 3,000 years ago. The Magic Man explains to Ethan Thomas, now being referred to as Remedium or the Remedy, apparently was perfectly tuned from birth to be able to project sound so powerful that it can destroy flesh and bone, as proven earlier when he wasted Farrell with his shout in the bumfight cage. The invincible voice. The metal pieces that Oro members are painfully implanted with are meant to help force these attributes onto the average doofuses that get into the club. Why? Well, we may never know, because the series fizzled out after this game, and as the title of the video suggests, it's never going to come back. The easy explanation is that they wanted world domination and have infiltrated the governments of the globe via sonic generation on the lesser elements of society, making them easier to control. They fear Ethan Thomas, the Remedy, because he possesses the trait that could bring them down. So, per the Magic Man, Ethan goes to the peninsula where Oro HQ is and destroys a bunch of big, powerful sound machine type dealies. You do some sick ground and pound on these Oro thugs like every beer-bellied idiot wishes they could while getting wasted at B-dubs during a UFC fight night before confronting Dorland. Yeah, remember him? Guess he's a super agent for the Oro, which is painfully obvious from very early on. So obvious that it wasn't even worth mentioning until now. Also, real quick, this is their big lair where they monitor the world. They watch the world on RCA monitors from 1997 inside of a scrap heap. Right. So you fight Dorland as he stalks you with his big dumb sonic mask, you shout the mask off, throw some combos, and then yell at him again to win. Yep, that's it. Evidently, the Oro are influencing people to go crazy in the hopes that they will become trained protectors, but he doesn't explain what we need protection from. I wish I was making this shit up. Ethan meets with LaRue and Rosa, where she explains that there are some influential people in the Oro. So, I guess these three were going to go back home and rest up before taking on the Oro in the third game or the canceled movie or whatever they thought was going to come next. The President of the US is giving a speech when someone passes him a note. He starts shaking and goes into cardiac arrest. That's some note. It reads, "The Remedy is among us. Ooh." Meaning that Ethan Thomas is in the his house, and gee, that was easy. If the Prez was in the Oro and Ethan is presumably taking them out, he doesn't really have to do much, does he? Just give people scary letters and poof, another one bites the dust. So, to sum up, a bunch of people formed a little tree fort club where they implanted metal into each other's mouths to take over the world via sound that makes people crazy to become unknowing protectors against who knows what, something they still struggle with 3,000 years later. You know, I guess I could have just written that and saved myself 10 pages. Shit. Anyway, that's the plot of Bloodshot, and as you can see, it's utterly ridiculous. It's so stupid so contrived, and even though it was clearly intended to be the halfway point in what would have eventually been explained in a third or even fourth game, not to mention the movie adaptation that never got off the ground, what we got here is just absurd. Not in a fun, kooky, over-the-top way either. I had mentioned with Condemned 1 that I wished for a more grounded, gritty, realistic plot instead of the silly supernatural noise that was thrown in, but I'm not a snob. Pierce Brosnan Bond is some of my favorite stuff in that franchise, and there was an invisible V-12 Vanquish in Die Another Day. Big schlocky stuff can be quite a bit of fun, but this nonsense of metal mouth sonic powers and hockey pucks strewn about the city that anyone with a stepladder could reach being the source of madness, and Ethan Thomas being the Dragonborn with the power to melt people with his voice, just fuck's sake. Imagine that from a bird's eye perspective, just this drunken, pasty idiot running around with taped fists yelling everyone to death. Cripes. After the credits, we see good old SKX getting his wish and being inducted into the Oro. He finally reached his dream. So, good job again, Malcolm Van Horn. So, there's been speculation on what exactly the Oro are training people to become protectors against. I'm willing to bet that in a third game, Ethan and Leland were to battle as Sonic equals, and then by the fourth and final game, they teamed up to face the greater threat. I've heard the theory that it's possibly aliens, and you might be raising an eyebrow, but there's a sneaky little radio broadcast that can be found during the bear chase. I didn't even find it on my first playthrough, only the second run where I was taking more time to explore, and it's kinda cool.
Okay, some sort of resonance, almost abnormal tuning quality, the likes the world has never seen.
One moment, Professor. One moment. So you're stating that this metal sample you have, had, was something not of this world?
No, dear lady, you misunderstand. It is of this world. But we don't have the technology, the capability to make this form of metal. But someone did. Yes, someone did. But it couldn't have been any known technologically advanced country that we are aware of.
There must be some faction, some unknown group that has taken metallurgy to a new level. But for what purpose? And where is this metal sample now, Professor?
It is, regrettably, missing.
This is City News.
Okay, so that does lend some credence to the fan theory that aliens are involved, and the metal is shown emitting resonance that destroys objects. Well, that's great there, man, but honestly, I'm sick and tired of talking about the plot for Condemned 2. Alright, so enough rambling about metal mouths and aliens. This is the important stuff, and more than anything, this seems to be the most divisive point about Condemned 2. Ethan may be a drunken bum now, but he's significantly improved his combat prowess on these mean streets. Okay, so Monolith, admirably, listened to all the criticism about the first Condemned and sought to address everything. The core gameplay elements are still divided between combat and detective work, only now both have been significantly expanded. Some people really loved this, some people really hated it. To preface talk about the combat mechanics, I want to bring up something that lead designer Frank Rook discussed when talking about adding layers to the melee system. He said that the goal was never realism, and that he wanted to maintain the quote-unquote creepy, impactful, and intense feeling from the first game while introducing combos that the player could string together. Rick Lico, the lead animator on both Condemned games, was evidently a massive fight game fan and helped to translate his knowledge of those games into the first-person mechanics of Bloodshot. So yeah, there are combos now. I'm not going to go down each and every move, we'll be here all day. That's rich from a guy that made a 3-hour video about a single horror game from the early 2000s, I know. Ethan can use his fists now, which I kind of thought was cool. I remember playing the first game and having a weapon break and thinking to myself, why can't you just punch these guys? Well, now you can, and it feels pretty good. Even upgraded, the hands don't do much damage, but they're fast and stringing together punches feels fluid, with each trigger representing your left and right fist. Holding both now blocks. Ethan can now do 1-2 combos and parry counter combos if you time the strikes right, which then adds a multiplier. This works for melee weapons as well. You also get a chain meter now, and if it's full, you can double tap the triggers to initiate a QTE that crushes your enemy. It's okay. Honestly, it got kind of tedious near the end of the game when I was caught up in constant QTEs in the heat of battle, but it did save me from death a few times, so it's not all bad, I suppose. If you bring an enemy to their knees, you can also do environmental finishers now too, a la the Punisher, a game I really love. They're not nearly as brutal as something like the Punisher or Manhunt 2 for that matter, but it's kind of cool, and at least one of them is pretty extreme, but that's coming. Hook attacks push enemies back, reducing their counter potential. Just click the left stick while squeezing either trigger and you're good. Nice, simple, and effective. I also love being able to sprint and attack, the bum rush as it were. Anyway, I don't want to go through every single little nuance, but as you can tell, the melee combat was significantly expanded in the sequel. Again, back to divisiveness. Some people really seem to enjoy the upgrades, and some people wish Monolith had just kept it simple. Gamers are exceptionally fickle, to make an understatement, but in my opinion, I applaud their efforts to at least address criticism. I appreciate the new moves, and it makes brawling feel a lot more open-ended and dynamic, as opposed to simply strike, block, taser, boot. And that's not all that was changed. In addition to the usual values attached to each weapon, damage, speed, and so forth, there's now a condition attribute. Weapons break a lot easier now, which may sound kind of corny, and on one hand it kind of is, but on the other hand, it adds a tremendous scramble in the middle of a brawl as you frantically seek out a new weapon, or resort to throwing bones, a rule that applies to enemies too. And seeing a bad guy panic as his weapon breaks, knowing it's time to run him down, is pretty exhilarating. Although, sometimes I don't fully understand the weapon values. According to this, a toilet seat will do more damage than my shotgun. I mean, it's got pee on it, so maybe there's a risk of infection in the long term, I don't know. Ethan can now throw weapons as well, with the tap of R1 or the right bumper. Throwing a weapon and then bum rushing someone is really satisfying, and it makes Ethan feel way more nimble than he did in Criminal Origins. And on that note, Ethan can move now. Thank Jesus, my big complaint from the first game was fully corrected and then some. Ethan can sprint for up to 6 seconds now, he recovers quickly, and he runs unhindered across any surface, including stairs. This is a huge quality of life improvement, and playing the sequel right after the first game, this felt so nice. Your health now works in a tiered system. If you can preserve a little life in a tier, it will regenerate to that level. If you're busted down a notch, you can use health kits to replenish a tier. Nice. What is not nice is a new enemy variant. The oil enemies, officially known as tar monsters. To the point, what is this dumb garbage? Why? It's so bad. These little things are jet black, and they often scurry quickly across a similarly jet black background. With their small stature, fast movement, the dark optical headache, and with the addition of shitty motion blur, tar monsters are a massive negative in Bloodshot. It also doesn't help that they do massive amounts of damage, and before you can even spot the little runts, you'll have a tier of health left if you're even still alive. And then there are these bizarre designated oil rooms that you'll come across from time to time. Not only is this a breeding ground for the awful tar monsters, but they're visually upsetting. And not in a shocking artistic way, I'm just talking plain offensive to the human eye. Just black oily surfaces dotted by giant testicles hanging around, spurting out these annoying spooge demons. This is just pure booty cheeks. A new addition that I consider a positive are the end level upgrades. This time, at the end of each chapter, you get a rating based on things like completing optional objectives, finding TV radio signals, sonic emitters destroyed, as well as your capabilities as a detective. As an example, for getting gold on this level, I got a punch dagger for my left hand. In a really cool touch for the rest of the game, you'll notice that punch dagger when you strike. And this is just one example, there are many more. This adds a lot of incentive to doing extra stuff on each board, as opposed to the first game where the birds and metal pieces that you could collect were just for achievements and bits of concept art. Alright, so those are some of the basic combat and quality of life upgrades and additions at a glance. But let's expand into the level design, investigative enhancements, and firearms. Let's start at the Preston Hotel. First thing, we gotta get this out of the way. Firearms play a much bigger role in Bloodshot than they did in Criminal Origins. There's the addition of ADS, which looks great by the way, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Firearms throughout are way more common. You can retrieve ammo off of fallen baddies, and eventually Ethan unlocks a holster to keep a pistol by his side while being able to wield a bigger weapon. We also see another new addition in the form of lockboxes. Ethan can find crates with medicine, ammo, or new firearms. Condemned 1 had hidden caches of stuff in some levels, but this is just an outright supply point like any old FPS. The hotel is a solid level after getting your feet wet battling hobos and tar monsters in the streets. You and your crew patrol through this rundown shithole, stopping along the way to do things like destroying meth labs. And, if nothing else, you get to admire the rock-solid heat distortion, fire, and explosion effects. The design is great. It's classic Condemned stuff, an ordinary environment that was at one time a lovely area for businessmen and families alike, now converted into a dingy, violent cesspool. Weaving through the corridors and individual rooms feels good and tense. Even heavily armed, you know you could be bombarded by meth freaks any second, and then you are. Ethan's newfound mobility works really well here. Darting from point to point feels good and somewhat tactical. I know a few people have really lamented the increased emphasis on shooting in Bloodshot versus the original, but to be fair, Ethan Thomas is a special agent and he is on a sanctioned mission here. He's not some random everyman that suddenly knows how to operate and move with weaponry. So for now, this is a good intro to the feel of firearms in the sequel. Here you can see that Ethan also gets the occasional prompt to respond to his surroundings. It's not imperative, but it does affect your end level score and keeps you engaged in the game at various points, but really it's just a QTE and wasn't necessary. Thankfully, not every new enemy variant is a victim of Deepwater Horizon shenanigans. Some are actually pretty sweet, like these big boys here with these Kratos chain arms. Their animations are awesome. They have high damage resistance and output, and make for a pretty formidable foe. And all I had was a bedpost. But worry not, guns are never far off. Alright, I've been dancing around the subject for a while now. Is it good or bad that more guns came to Condemned 2? Look, ultimately, I prefer the guns were more of a treat that came in small doses, like in the first game, and I do really dislike that near entire levels in Bloodshot felt like an expansion of Fear 2. Come to think of it, as I'm reading this, Fear 2, Blood 2, Condemned 2, Monolith has quite a history of making somewhat divergent, dodgy sequels. Except for No One Lives Forever 2, that was really good.
Excellent.
Anyway, back on track. Bloodshot added more guns, and it's just a fact of the game, and my bitching doesn't change that. At least if Monolith was going to do this, they made the combat big, loud, crunchy, and super satisfying. Leveling a shithead with a revolver feels powerful and steely. As soon as the hammer drops, you get that thunderous blast. The Uzi in particular is highly visceral and kinda scary in the best way. They even included Lord Humongous's Model 29. And there's other stuff like an AR and a lever action in the Lodge, etc. But look, increased gunplay definitely upended the special feeling that firearms had in the first game. There are sections that feel much more like Fear 2 than what I would have drafted a second Condemned game to be were it up to me. However, it wasn't up to me, so in retrospect, at least what's here is good, okay? Well, except for this impromptu turret section with a nail gun. What is this? Would you just stop? This section is pure garbage, and whoever implemented it, I hope you stub your toe while watering your spice garden and cry for 20 minutes. Thankfully, fighting around the world isn't the only thing we do. Ethan is still a detective, and the investigation mechanics have been overhauled in a big way. This time, during detective work, you'll have some variety, and you'll do what feels like some actual detective work. Now, instead of just pointing a digital camera or a gas spectrometer at something, you gather clues in a scene based on the evidence before you. After deciding that you've collected the right information, you'll present it to Rosa, and based on the accuracy, you'll get a rating from poor to perfect. At times, evidence can be stacked, meaning that you'll pick something to analyze and be given additional choices therein. At other times, Rosa will ask Ethan some questions about case details, and Ethan will select from a handful of options. Choosing the most intelligent, relative one will net you a rating as well. Some of the multiple choice sections are a little confusing as they seem somewhat subjective, like questioning where a vasopressin comes from versus something being dehydrated in a snowy area. Like, I guess one of those is more pertinent than the other, apparently. Either way, it adds a ton of variety and a little replayability even. The team does implement use of forensic tools again, except now they directly relate to how you're interpreting your findings. It's not rocket science, but solving a scene with a perfect score feels really good, and it made me feel like a big smart boy. Sometimes the clues are presented clearly, and sometimes it takes a little bit of patience and simply looking around, but it never felt prohibitively difficult, certainly. And, most importantly, I never once felt like stopping to do this stuff slowed down the game. Maybe you have a different opinion, but I was always excited to solve a new scenario when I was just starting to get sick of fighting, and then just when I was tanked up on Columbo Jumbo, it was time to beat off some bums. Yeah, you heard what I said. Sadly, the level design and quality is all over the place. The hotel is pretty good. Then you do some battling in an urban environment. Not bad, not memorable. Then you get to the doll factory. So, the first few levels do a little of the goofy supernatural hallucinatory bull stuff with the oil enemies and all that, but things go full tilt and devolve into pure nonsense in the doll factory. The setting itself is cool, and conceptually it's a winner. A rundown, abandoned factory with vagrants and a variety of tools to fight them with? Great. But why are there toddler-sized dolls that appear to be sentient? They march towards you like a toy and then explode after carrying out a cute little animation. Have they been programmed to do this? Is it black magic? Is the spirit of Brad Dourif in them? Guys, you gotta give me something beyond creepy dolls explode because spooky doll factory. Now, the way they shush the little baby bomb on them and wave bye-bye is a really great set of animations. I don't want to take away from that. And the concept is cool, it just makes no sense. It's never hinted that the Oro made these things, nothing. And this isn't the only level, but it's one of the instances where it seems like someone had an idea for a setting, and the team just said, yeah, throw it in there and rub soot everywhere. The second part of the level is worse. You run around a burning building with a gas mask over your face that almost completely obscures your visual field. You run around turning valves to extinguish fires to be able to sprint by safely, which is as lame and lazy as it sounds, and you're being rushed by flaming bums. Literally flaming, never mind. They latch onto you and drain your health pool mighty quick, and it's really lame. All the while, you're being crept up on by sentient baby bombs. As I had mentioned, this is a level that I had some memory of from my original playthrough back in 08, and in my mind, I remembered really liking it. But this is just awful. And just when you think it can't get much worse, what is this? There's a boss fight. It's just some random crazy lady with a lollipop saw thing. Who is this? Was she an employee? Did she design the doll bombs? I guess she dresses like a doll 'cause doll factory. Again, this feels like someone drew the concept art and a bunch of dweebs just said, oh, we have to find a way to incorporate this. So you brawl a little bit, which is fine, but then it gets worse. She runs up on a catwalk and starts raining down baby bombs on you. You return fire with your own, grabbed off of a conveyor belt. She runs left to right, and if your timing is off, you'll miss her. It's so lame. And what makes it sting even worse is when you do beat her, you get her weapon, the lollipop saw, and it sucks. Every value is worse than this little hammer. Come on, at least drop a powerful boss weapon, no? Then you do this really lame rewire puzzle in an elevator before round 3 with the doll woman. After more boring fighting, you pull off the best finisher in the game. As much as I dislike the doll factory and would have altered bits of it, I wouldn't have cut it from the game. The big hallucination level, on the other hand, was a complete waste of time. In this Max Payne 2-esque nightmare scenario, Ethan wanders around SCU HQ in a very, very boring sequence of phantasmagorical nonsense. The screen gets some static overlays. At times, you'll get a spooky noise or, gasp, a soda can will roll into the hall. It's just not scary. And when you start to nod off from boredom, the game reverts back to a full-blown FPS, with the addition of obnoxious, terrible filters thrown haphazardly around to emphasize that, whoa, Ethan is losing his mind, who cares, we already know that. Don't punish my senses for buying your goddamn game. And wouldn't you know it, oil rooms and tar monsters get added to the mix. Because of course they do. If it were 1 or 2 of them, whatever, but oh no, no such luck. You not only get the awful filter effects, you get another full-blown oil room. I mean, don't take my word for it, just look. Does this look like fun to you? And the kicker, the health I lost during that imaginary sequence stays lost when Ethan comes to. Like, what? Ethan suffers real damage in Dreamland. Someone call Robert Englund. At least you get to take out your frustrations in your boss's office. Hey Paul, you want to see me, dude? Alright, so after the doll factory and hallucination stuff, the museum puts this game back on track. It's proper Condemned, with small optional twists. There's a tiny bit of stealth potential, and you're given the option to pacify the guards instead of ending them, which is a very natural side objective, as these are just people doing their jobs, not cranked out nutters, although they show up. Oh, do they? The rubber sole upgrade for Ethan's boots allows you to creep if you push the stick slowly forward. It's nothing complex, and it only lasts a brief while, so don't get too stoked. This isn't Splinter Cell. It's definitely Condemned, and on that note, battling lunatics dressed in the decor born of the environment comes at you in spades here. The baddies are wearing bits of medieval armor, and you can wield weapons from the displays, to include broadswords, battle axes, and warhammers. And the outfits that the enemies are wearing are not just for show. This dude is wearing shoulder armor on his left. When I attacked with my right arm, it kept plinking off the armor. I switched to a left-hand attack and Sure enough, got some damage in. This is genuinely brilliant design and clearly came from the brightest minds in the studio. The finale sees Ethan take on a big boy decked out in full armor. It's a classic end-of-level gaming boss. He's big and powerful with a hidden weak point, and the finale is rewarding.
Woo! You know you did.
Some of the armored enemies are naturally spongy, and getting ganged up on can be annoying, but the investigative bits, the setting, and the general layout make this a damn fine Condemned level. The Black Lake Lodge is not this place.
Doppelganger!
But it's solid. First, it must be said, you probably know what's coming. Aside from what that is, this is nice because, for once in this game, I'm not being bombarded by tar monsters or hallucinations with painful visual filters. In all sincerity, what works so well about this level is the patient, slow burn to the big encounter. If you don't know what's coming, the revelation is great, and even if you do know, the on-foot approach to the lodge in the cold, desolate winterland is a nicely paced bit of breathing room. A little bit of investigative work and a small trail run. Once inside, we are in tight quarters with mauled remains of SCU agents sent to take out Agent Thomas, but something got to them first. And as each corridor squeezes you in, tighter and tighter, further and further from the exit, the sounds of this gigantic, heavy beast are all around you. And then it finds you. And suffice it to say, you had better run. Ha! The bear! Everyone loves the bear, and with good reason. It's brilliant. Just you and this force of nature trapped in this little building full of tight crawl spaces. The animations for the bear and the sound design do great to carry the illusion of this hungry, brutish monstrosity. And it's not an alien, it's not a sonic emitter, and it's not a doll lady with exploding baby robots. It's just a rabid, hungry grizzly bear, and it's easily the most memorable moment in the entire game. It's not terribly complicated. It's a handful of rooms that you sprint through until you learn the pattern. A dying SCU agent gives you his last shot shell, and...
No!
The bear thing does not overstay its welcome, which is good, and each encounter in those few rooms will crank the pucker factor up high. However, it's over kinda quick, and when it's done, the bear is just gone. It doesn't come back for a showdown. You don't pull it out of a trap where it then looks at you like, okay, respect, before running off. You don't even find its dead body. It's just gone. Just as the madness ends, we're back outside, and I don't know what it is about these remote, isolated settings. Maybe because I'm around people and buildings and concrete all day and I'm sick to death of it all. Levels like the Lodge or the Apple Orchard farmhouse have this tremendous effect on me. It's a mix of quaint, comforting, and inviting charm, blended with these desperate feelings of isolation. And after the bear, you aren't sure what to expect. Also, setting this in the snow was an excellent touch, a good change of scenery. But then it takes a step back. Ethan needs to get into Malcolm Van Horn's library, and to do that, he has to defuse this bomb. How do we do that? Use your UV light to trace tubes leading around the lodge. There are 6 bombs that you have to find and dispose of by throwing it out of the nearest window. It's basically the UV light letter puzzle from the farmhouse in the first Condemned, but instead of that creepy, cold silence with the occasional slimy enemy in the basement, you're now John McClane, and you take on heavily armored SCU agents with a standard AR. It just becomes another generic action game. Granted, the setting is absolute money, and the visuals bring this lovely place to life, but it's hard to notice when you're searching for bomb canisters and blasting generic thugs in black armor. And there are 6 of these bombs. Did you think that was enough, fellas? You'll notice this ongoing roller coaster of quality. This is where things pick back up again. The bowling alley in Trenton. I mentioned earlier that this is where you talk with SKX and everything. Well, spoiler alert, he breaks free and rams this bus into the alley. This is pure Condemned here. Familiar environments wrought with filth and decay, scary, angry hobos, and everyday objects to bash them with. Bowling balls, bowling pins, foosball rods, and even a gumball machine. This is just great stuff. And if all else fails, you get a trusty 22. The level is short, but sweet, and it gives way to an old familiar haunt, the school from the first game. And things get really grim. SKX has been torturing the homeless, and this is heavy, genuinely disturbing stuff. It's gruesome, and it's perfect for this kind of series. And hey, look who it is. She was preserved for 11 months in the freezer. That's actually pretty clever. Then we go to Svensson's Magic Theater, and I'd say it's like a fever dream, but I would use that as a term of endearment. This just feels like another random concept that got wedged in to fill space. Like the doll factory, the concept has a lot of potential, but the execution is completely underwhelming. The opening is a little arena where you fight tar monsters. This level is where you can feel the BioShock influence the heaviest. It's kind of obvious that Monolith wanted to create their own Dr. J.S. Steinman with the Magic Man, but there's just nothing here and it feels so forced. The character just was wedged into the plot like he has some big history with Ethan, but it's just, yeah, I know that guy, and boom, cut to the theater and whoa, look at all our zany antics. You fight his assistants because a magician would have those, I guess. There's no real build-up to the man himself outside of some posters and a little bit of dialogue over a PA. Then he just shows up for a boss fight just because I guess there had to be one. He teleports to different platforms while Ethan throws an endless supply of liquor bottles his way. I'm not kidding. Then he ends up in a big cage overhead, you pull a lever, and down to a bed of nails he goes. There was so much potential for an extended level where Ethan's hallucinations could have been incorporated and explained as tricks by the Magic Man. Think of a funhouse type level with all sorts of traps based on the classic magician tropes throughout time. Think about catching a bullet with your teeth or being locked in a glass box with your hands and feet cuffed. This just feels curtailed, like it was meant to be so much more originally, but a lot of stuff had to be cut. Ethan then hitches a ride on a cargo ship hauling scrap. The interior structure is insanely boring. Just heaps of dark, grimy, gray and brown surfaces. There's also apparently several gigantic men that were crafty enough to fashion their own Mark 44 suits and have the strength to wield them. It's kinda cool to have a Mr. X type character chasing you, I guess, but again, it comes off like, well, this exists because this. There's a doll factory, so doll lady. There's a magic theater, so magician. There's scrap metal, so big metal guy. And I know the first game had lunch lady because school, but that felt like a neat little addition that added a touch of flavor to the level, a very small part. And maybe one of these guys would have been special, but there are 3. Why 3? And you don't defeat each of them in a unique way or anything like that. You sit up on this perch, use a big pipe fitting to lure one at a time, and then activate the magnet to drag them over to the crusher. And after the first one goes, the other 2 just follow on like lemmings, oblivious to the screams and heavy metal crunching sounds, I guess. I mentioned this with the appropriate disdain earlier, but this nail gun turret section is ballsly. It's pure wank. Ethan gets hurt, and he has to lay here like a body pillow while he fends off waves of skinny monsters, and it's awful. I made it look easy because this was my third attempt.
Oh, come on, Shelly. You'll always be Shelly to me, all right, Shelly? So come on, Shelly.
Then you land on Oro HQ, and the full scope of Ethan's dragon shout comes into being. This last section does something that frustrates me to no end in a video game. And not frustrates as in grr, angry, more just like disappointment, you know? The game simply shits the bed right in the final level. It's just, hey, let's swarm you with a collection of the lamest stuff from our game, and let's do it inside the most boring looking environment possible. We're back to following blue lines of whatever around. It's back to the lodge where you have to find the bombs, except now the route is just lit up for you. You just run along these trails, stopping to engage the generic bad guys with a generic rifle, and when you get to the end of each line, it's a big, giant sound machine that you defeat by tuning the frequency. Throughout the game, you can find radios and television sets that Ethan can tune in on to learn more about the goings-on in Metro City and whatnot. You just rotate the stick to find the signal. It is as boring as that sounds. But someone was so proud of this mechanic that they made it a major part of the final level. They even put a little radio in the middle of all this so you can tune signals while you tune signals. It gets worse, somehow. They throw in a helo battle for you, and it's exceptionally corny. Just pop out, take some shots, use your voice shout thing, just end it already. The finale doesn't redeem Bloodshot at all. As a matter of fact, it stinks. You simply use your voice to shout off these dumbass helmets and then ground and pound with QTEs. Then you tune another big sound machine. Hooray. Then you fight Dorland, and guess what? Go on, guess. You shout his big dumb helmet off and then QTE ground and pound. Oh, and if you miss one prompt, start over. God damn it. Finally, you'll achieve victory, and I just couldn't have cared less. I wanted to be done with this level in the worst way. Not exactly how you want your triumphant final battle in your game to feel, but maybe it's personal taste. God damn, these last few levels sucked. They're not only boring and tedious on their own merit, but they feel nothing like Condemned. It feels like a bad DLC for Fear 3. Now think about what I just said. The Bloodshot Fight Club is essentially a sort of challenge mode for players seeking extra content. Apparently this was just a little gameplay demo arena that Monolith could show to the higher-ups at Sega, which then eventually evolved into a playable feature. There's the practice arena where you can basically just work on your combos as much as you like, and this was the playable demo area for Sega. There's the riot control where you have to pick off hulking junkies, another where you need to smoke 3 masked rioters, the lockdown where you need to eliminate as many thugs as you can in 5 minutes, Streets of Rage where you have to keep 5 museum guards alive while taking out the vandals. And hey, get it? Streets of Rage? Because Sega published this? And lastly, my favorite, the Deadly Daycare where you're tasked with exploding 100 dolls as fast as possible. It's just so damned goofy and I couldn't help but enjoy myself. And it takes place in the old apple orchard farmhouse, so points for nostalgia. These modes aren't amazing or anything, but I do appreciate that the team had a little fun with their mechanics and gave players an extra bit of content to boot. There was also a full multiplayer suite included. Sadly, I never had the chance to try it. I beat the campaign once and just kind of put the game aside for all these years. Unfortunately, it seems that this mode was mandated by the publisher, as was the style at the time. Even the almighty BioShock wasn't immune to this trend, with the sequel having a tacked on multiplayer mode as well. and it was never balanced. Don't think I forgot about that Electro Bolt Elephant Gun combo, you dicks. Anyway, from what I understand, between the campaign and the multiplayer suite, the Bloodshot team was stretched thin, and sacrifices had to be made. I'm not sure the specifics, but evidently the campaign's quality suffered as a result of the publisher-forced multiplayer. However, from everything I've read, the people that did play the multiplayer for Bloodshot apparently loved it. I've read a lot of high praise for this mode, and the footage seems like a lot of fun with a few unique modes that sound great, like Bum Rush and Crime Scene. I really appreciate that Monolith didn't just slap on TDM and call it good, but I'll never know.
Shit! Fucker! Shit!
Hey, look who it is. I've been referencing the things that I dislike about the visuals in Bloodshot all throughout this video, like the visual filters, the oil rooms, and the odd character designs. I don't want to harp on that stuff forever. There's a lot here that I really love. The weapon models all still look great, from the gumball machine to the broadsword, down to the way the creepy baby doll thing blinks and looks around while you wield it. It's excellent. And although you do see some recycled animations from the first game during battle, they all still look great in action. Despite still running on the Jupiter EX engine, character models and especially faces look much improved, despite how odd the designs are. The levels are all perfectly corroded and do a good job of demonstrating how filthy and run down the city of Metro has become, even if the filth and grime is taken a little too far in some places, to the point where it's hard to appreciate the texture quality. The frame rate holds up surprisingly well given how much they're asking these old consoles to do. On the list of games that I wish would get a proper PC port, this one is near the top. I can't believe that Bloodshot only ever came to the PS3 and 360, and aside from performance, the big problem with Condemned 2 is that availability. It's still locked to those two old consoles, and that's a shame. Imagine this game on a modern rig, it would be fantastic. The option to remove the stupid motion blur and to improve the frames to modern standards would be lovely. I love the aesthetics of a few levels. I ranted about the lodge earlier, but it bears repeating that I really enjoy the cozy battleground. The hand-carved wood trim, the bar and the living quarters, and despite the level being a turd overall, the look of Svensson's Magic Theater is breathtaking. The lighting in the lift tech engine is still drop-dead gorgeous. I can practically feel the heat coming from this vintage chandelier. And the high ceilings with the incredible etching into the wood from however many years back, the old musty heavy theater curtains around the area, it's really impressive visually. The final level in the Oro HQ, however, looks like it plays, which is trash.
Still having hallucinations? Perhaps it's your drinking.
My drinking is not an issue.
Right. Look, I'll go get this processed. In the meantime, Farrell wants to see you in his office for a mission debriefing.
You know, oddly enough, I don't have much to say about the audio design in Condemned 2. The new voice acting is okay. No disrespect to the actor, he was doing the job he got paid for, and I'm happy for him. But the new edgy Ethan was a terrible choice, and nobody enjoyed it.
My drinking is not an issue.
We all wanted Greg Grunberg to come back, and I'm sure he could have pulled off tired, drunk, and pissed off. How hard could that be? Paul Eiting, aka Colonel Campbell, voices both Malcolm Van Horn and Ike Farrell in this game, which was another very stupid choice. Paul is a legend, and I gushed about how awesome he was in my Metal Gear Solid review, but two characters? Now look, Peter Jacobs, the guy who voiced SKX in the first game, also voiced Officer Becker and Detective Dickinson in that same game. I had no clue all these years because they sound like three different people. All due respect, but Paul Eiting always sounds like Paul Eiting, even when his pitch changes. He's got a very distinct voice, and in Bloodshot, both of his characters sound identical anyway, so
I'll be asking you questions regarding the recovery mission of Malcolm Van Horn. Please answer them to the best of your ability. He found me. I don't have much time. Ethan trusted you.
The sound design is still good, with the bear stalking you in the Black Lake Lodge being a big highlight, but all in all, it just doesn't hit the same as the first Condemned, and the music is practically non-existent here. There is a soundtrack, but I defy you to recall a single melody after you complete the game. Condemned 2 received some high praise from a handful of critics and some middling to low scores from others. I would normally elaborate, but that kind of sums up the feeling of Condemned 2's legacy. Mixed. It was a sequel to a very successful, much-loved game that really helped to introduce people to what the Xbox 360 was capable of. But Bloodshot is a strange duck. Most levels feel like off-the-wall ideas that had no connection to one another, and they had to be strung together with plot contrivances like deer feces. Now, to be fair, the first game had a little of that too, but the first one felt like a much tighter, focused experience, where each level was paced just right, give or take. Some of the levels in Bloodshot, like the final one, the doll factory, and the lodge sequence where you have to find 6 different bombs, just seem to go on forever. Whereas the Magic Theater throws a couple of magician's assistants at you and then suddenly goofy boss fight and over. The most interesting stuff, like the bowling alley, can be beaten inside of 10 minutes, and the bear chase, as good as it is over before you know it. Ethan's redesign is terrible, and the edge factor is at a 12, which sucked even at the time. That said, the team's attempt to address the shallow nature of the first game's melee and detective work is really admirable, and I don't want to be a big Debbie Downer. Condemned 2 has some highlights, and some pieces that really shine. It just sucks that the rest of the game is a bit of an unfocused mess, with bizarre, arbitrary bits of madness thrown in. Oh well. Ultimately, if you're a fan of the first game, and you have an old PS3 or 360 lying around, or if you use Xenia, it's worth at least one playthrough. Now, what about the future of the franchise? In 2015, Jace Hall, one of the founders of Monolith Studios, posted on his Facebook account. He states that he owns the entire Condemned franchise, and because he's a busy beaver, hasn't had the time to do much with it. However, he also stated that he's open to entertaining offers from potential developers. He also states that he's not going to question how a developer will get funding for their potential Condemned project, and that it doesn't even have to be a full game at all. It could be, quote, a simple mobile phone app for starters, unquote. Whoa, red flag on that play, Governor. I'm not trying to pick at Jace Hall. I don't even know the guy. I'm sure he's lovely and all. I know that he created the real-time 3D authoring technology for a game like Blood 2, and that's great. But when I read through his bio and what he's done lately, he definitely comes off as more of a businessman in the last several years. And there's nothing wrong with that. Get paid for your work, man. Hell yeah. Your work. Hey man, I know it can be hard being an indie developer. Just rent my license. You guys do all the work, including how you secure funding, and make a quick mobile phone thing, and I'll get my little slice, and you guys get the privilege of notoriety. Fame awaits, your name in lights, etc., etc. I'm not saying it sounds like the record industry, but it looks like the Condemned IP is going to be on hold for a very, very long time. And unless someone comes up with a big idea or buys the franchise rights to a series that has lain dormant since 2008, the odds are slim that Condemned will ever return. I hope I'm wrong, I really do. But in the meantime, I'm so thankful that I got to live through it when it mattered the most. Nowadays, everyone is so pessimistic about every new game and every new console, and this generation sadly has been kind of a sour note in general for many reasons. Every time I go back to play Condemned, I enjoy the game itself, of course, but really, I kind of like feeling what's left of that magic that came with the launch of the Xbox 360. It's slowly diminishing every year. If you weren't there for it, there's simply no way you could understand, I'm sorry. Those were special times, and everyone really seemed to love them. I guess it's just best to accept that those days are gone for good. Some may say that they're even condemned.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!